Greetings, TLI class. I'm Frankie Stamps, and I was asked to be the instructor this week for this week's topic, which is beliefs and belief systems. This is just the most fascinating topic I could imagine teaching. I'm very excited to be your instructor this week. Can't wait for our classroom discussions. In fact, there's so much material that's involved with beliefs that we thought it best to provide some of it through this video series before you get to the classroom, so that will leave us more time to be able to actually have a discussion on the topics. So this is just part of the material we're going to be presenting. The rest is going to be presented in class. So this first part deals with how the secular world views beliefs, truth, and knowledge. So let's get right into it. I picked this symbol of a whirlwind to represent the way this talk proceeds. The topic of belief, and the way I present it, is called a whirlwind of ideas. I'm Frankie Stamps, your instructor, and I'm just presenting part one in this video series. Here's an outline for the topics we'll be discussing. And as you can see, we're starting off with just thinking off the top of our heads, what does truth mean and what does belief mean? Then we're going to talk about secular philosophy, bring a little bit of reality check to it, and that's all that's going to be involved in this first video series, or what I'm calling part one. Then in class we're going to talk about Christian philosophical view, core beliefs, work on our false beliefs, and talk about God's truth to you, finally getting down to the point of the funnel where we're talking about the implications for you personally. Before I proceed any further with any kind of additional information, I would like for you to take this quiz. We'll talk about the objective of the quiz in a minute, but if you haven't done so already, pause the tape and take the quiz. And what I intend for you to do here is, inside each box is a statement like 2 + 2 = 4, and I want you to think about whether you believe that statement is true or false, what your belief is about that statement, and put a T or an F in the lower left-hand corner box. There are really no trick questions. I'm not trying to fool you. You should be able to zip through and answer all of these questions within 1 minute, certainly no longer than 2. The second part of the quiz is to take a look at each of the statements again and your response to whether you thought they were true or false, and to fill in the lower right-hand corner box a number 1 through 5. And what this is how firm is your belief? So my intention for having you fill out that quiz and my questions that are about to happen on this page are to try to get you to think a little bit outside of the box and to kind of rattle your cage a little bit about, why do I believe certain things? If we were in a classroom setting right now, this is the place where I would stop and have significant discussion amongst ourselves. Since you're watching this on videotape, I'm going to ask you to think about each question I'm presenting here on this page by maybe pausing the tape and sitting quietly and thinking in your own mind, what answer would I give to each of these questions? So the first question that I have is, where do my beliefs come from? Where do my beliefs come from? I have these beliefs in my head. How did they get established? The next question is there such a thing as absolute truth? And the question that kind of leads to is, what is the definition of truth? Maybe you can pause the tape here and camp on that question and see if you can come up with what you think the definition of truth is. That's not a very easy definition. And finally, how do I know if my belief matches the truth? How do I know if my belief matches the truth? I've got an interesting story to tell that is probably relevant at this point. Please forgive me if you're Baptist. It's not a particular being against the Baptists. Could have happened anywhere. But I was in a church down in Tennessee, and the preacher was believing and kind of preaching on the idea that his denomination had a kind of a more accurate interpretation of Scripture, maybe a corner on truth. And so to illustrate his point, he asked, is there anybody here in the congregation that is not Baptist? And there was a brave little older lady that sitting a few rows back from the front, who kind of timidly raised her hand, but she was brave to do that. And he said, well, ma'am, do you mind if I ask what denomination you are? And she said, well, I'm Episcopalian. And he said, well, do you mind if I ask why you're Episcopalian? She said, well, my grandfather was Episcopalian and my father was Episcopalian, so I guess I just followed in their footsteps, and I'm Episcopalian. Well, the preacher wanted to make his point a little bit more. He wasn't particularly kind that day, so he said to the lady, well, let me ask you another question. If your grandfather was a moron and your father was a moron, what would that make you? She thought about it for a minute and said, well, I guess that'd make me a Baptist. Not to completely dissect a joke and kind of tear it apart, but to illustrate the point that we're trying to make here in this lecture. Sometimes a lot of what we believe is based upon how we grew up, what our parents believed, the culture we were brought up in. Later, the lady was asked, well, what would that make you? And she threw out that she probably, if she were an imbecile, would be a Baptist. Again, no offense, it's a joke. It could have been any religion, it could have been any denomination. But the thing is that she may have said that because she was trying to give the right answer, for example. She knew that everybody else was Baptist, and maybe peer pressure is one of the reasons you believe what you believe. More than likely, she was being clever and kind of being rebellious. And so maybe you believe what you believe because you're trying to go counterculture or counteract someone's particular beliefs or someone's particular pressure on you. So just wanted to tell that little story. Thought it would be fun. So the point of all of this is just to get you to think about why you believe what you believe. And I believe asking these kinds of questions can make your faith stronger. So that last chart kind of ends our thinking off the top of our head. And I'm going to talk now about what secular Western philosophy believes. There's a branch of philosophy called epistemology, and the area that it studies is the idea of knowledge. And it provides definitions for things like truth and knowledge and belief. So what is the secular world's view of truth? Well, the definition here, it's kind of a Webster's dictionary definition, is in accordance to the facts or reality. Now, what's the definition of facts and what's the definition of reality? You could go down that rabbit hole, but suffice it to say, we're just going to stick with this definition, according to the facts or reality. Now, the question really is, can it be verified or validated in some way? A statement or something that's happening in reality. Can it be verified or validated? So if I say it's raining outside right now, there's a way of proving whether that's true or not. We can go outside and see if it is indeed raining outside our building here. So how do we validate or verify something? Well, there are numerous ways, but the scientific method is a way that modern science or modern man thinks about validating facts or truth in terms of the physical world. There's our own experience, there's observations, there's logical proofs, there's various ways in which mankind has come about to understand how to verify or validate whether a statement is true or not. The next term I'd like to introduce the definition of is knowledge. So knowledge is defined as a cognition or awareness of the truth. And this is almost kind of an Eastern philosophy kind of thing, where we've got an interaction of reality with the mind. So I've got some truth sitting there, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, and that truth exists whether I'm aware of it or not. And then there might be a mind or someone thinking or a person, and when you combine a truth with the cognition that happens inside a mind, you end up with knowledge in the formal definition from Western philosophy's point of view. And what we're talking about here is knowing that something is true. So knowing that 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, or I know that the earth is round. It's different than knowing how we do something, like how I know how to add 2 plus 2, or I know how to play golf. The formal definition of knowledge is, specifically dealing with a fact, a mind, and the combination of the two resulting in a thing called knowledge. And finally, a formal definition of the word belief is the acceptance that a statement is true or that something exists. In that definition, the word acceptance is really a key word. It implies that, whatever doubts we might have or whatever questions we might have had about a particular statement, they've been reduced or possibly stopped altogether. So there's just no more questioning about whether 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. But our beliefs may or may not align with the truth. Just because I believe something obviously doesn't make it true. So just to come back to the quiz that I had you do at the beginning, I wanted you to think about truth versus what I believe is true. I wanted you to meditate a little bit on that and cause you to think a little bit about that. The fact is, in this particular table, I tried to arrange it so that from left to right went from more deterministic or concrete to more fuzzy. And from top to bottom, I tried to arrange the statements from more concrete to more fuzzy. But that kind of brings me back to the question of why is it that some statements are more deterministic than others? Well, I could spend quite a bit of time on this chart, but let me try to quickly breeze through it. Why is it that some statements are easier to define truth and line your belief with that than others? Well, it turns out in common understanding or secular philosophy, math and science are two disciplines that are a lot more concrete than other areas. Math is believed to be the one arena where there are absolute truths, and the reason for that is because it's a man-made system. And we define the rules, and so if you break the rules, you would say what you're saying is false. On the other hand, even though it's a man-made system, it's really an abstract representation of real physical observations. So if I've got 2 apples and I've got another 2 apples, I've got 4 apples, and math is just an abstraction of that into a symbol or a number system. So math is very concrete. Science, likewise, it answers the questions of what and how, but not the why questions, but the what and how of the physical world. And its objective is to define the truth and base that truth solely on observations. And it's constantly searching for the truth and constantly refining what it believes the truth is as it uses that scientific method, which is basically put out a theory, which is nothing more than a statement. I have a hypotenuse that water freezes at 32 degrees at sea level, and then it goes about running some experiments to prove or disprove that statement. That's its job. History, on the other hand, can never be absolutely proven. It's a very odd thing. There is something that happened yesterday, but we cannot go back in time. So what really happens oftentimes, the actual truth of what happened gets distorted by the storyteller or by the person who's remembering it or by however the history is being conveyed. It probably gets distorted somewhat. This statement about it's best to believe the most probable and not what's possible in history, that's an interesting thought to think about. You want to say, George Washington was absolutely the first president of the United States, and there's no doubt about that. We kind of say that because that's the most probable fact. Let me try to give you an example to make it more clear. I could say I was in LA on a business trip last week, and if you tried to prove that, the best you could do is come up with circumstantial evidence. So you might ask me, let me see your ticket stub for the airline, and I might be able to produce one. You might ask some of my coworkers, call them up, was Frankie in LA last week? They'd say yes, but perhaps they were lying. Perhaps I manufactured that ticket. Perhaps I was still here in Virginia having an affair that I didn't want my wife to know, so I asked my coworkers to lie for me. There's other possibilities besides what really happened. So of all those possibilities, you decide really which one is the truth by going with the most probable given the circumstantial evidence. So did Christ really live and walk on this earth? And there are people that come up with all kinds of other possible scenarios. He was a made-up character. He wasn't really God. There's all kinds of possible answers. But what's the circumstantial evidence point to? What is the most probable answer about what happened in history? And finally, when we get into something like psychology or any kind of branch of medicine, there's no absolute truth. There's kind of a best effort. So doctors, especially research doctors, are kind of scientists trying to find the best solutions based on observation and experiment. But their answers for healing the body or trying to cure diseases often gets modified as our knowledge base grows. Philosophy is a fuzzy area where truth can't necessarily be proven. And ideas about yourself. There's abundant misconceptions about ourselves. And good self-esteem is perceived as an ideal goal by the secular world. So that brings me to my first key point in this discussion on beliefs. And that key point is that mankind is constantly searching for the truth. It's just, you can see it down through history. You can see it in all areas of study that mankind is trying to figure out what is true and what is false. And kind of a corollary to that is that what mankind is trying to do is align his beliefs with the truth. And that is indicative of the idea that our beliefs may not be aligned with the truth. And so, therefore, there's that constant search for the truth. So, it's time for a reality check. Everything I've described up to here is kind of theoretical, very kind of intellectualizing the problem or philosophizing the problem. But in reality, one of the ways we can tell what we believe is by the outcome of those beliefs. So, our beliefs tend to exist in our heads, and there's some actual situation that perhaps happens, and we tend to interpret the world around us and what events are actually happening. We tend to interpret that in terms of our beliefs. So out of our beliefs in a particular situation will come feelings and conscious thoughts. And then on top of that, after those events happen, there tends to be a behavior that's a reflection of those feelings and those thoughts. The world is colored by our beliefs. So let's watch a couple of videos and see how our belief drives our behavior.
I'm going to try to reach down and struggle to tie my shoe in hopes of having somebody to come over and hold my stuff. When I hand over my stuff, I'm going to secretly plant this spider on the back of their hand.
Need help, man?
Oh yeah, if you don't mind, just grab from the bottom. Thanks, man.
Yeah,
appreciate
no
it. Thanks.
There you go, no problem.
Oh, shit.
You got it?
Yeah, spider.
No, don't say that.
It just broke.
Oh, you do! Oh, you do! What is that?
Got it?
Oh,
It's
shit.
a bad idea.
Yeah.
I got it,
You
I
got
got
it? Okay.
I got it.
Okay. Sorry, it's a bad day today.
We got it.
Yeah.
What's in here?
Oh, there's a spider in there.
Oh, where? What's his name?
Oh, is there a crack in the box?
Oh, take it. Take it. Take it.
It didn't get on you? Oh.
What's the actual?
Anything fall out by any chance?
No, no. You guys are believing me there. I don't like spiders.
Here.
No, there's no spiders. No.
Oh, back your hand, back your hand. Oh my God.
You get $100 if you can do the limbo right under here, but you got to be blindfolded, all right? And limbo.
Just more or less as a joke, I want to say you can even levitate if you believe hard enough. Took some snapshots from those videos where people are believing so hard, whatever they're believing, they're off the ground, literally. I believe with each of the individual lecturers that people are going to tell you a little bit about themselves, tell you a little bit about their life history. So I'm going to give you a little bit of insight here in what I'm calling reality check number 1B. And this is my life or my particular path. For some reason, not sure why, all my life I've kind of been driven to try to find what the truth is with respect to God. You know, some of my primary questions is, does God really exist? And if he does, what is his nature? And how do I know for sure? How do I prove that what I'm believing is the truth and I'm not fooling myself? People tend to resist switching from their basic culture, you know. So if you're Muslim, you're probably going to be Muslim all your life. If you're Hindu, you're going to be Hindu. It's very hard to swap from one major religion or culture to another. Because of that, it just bugged the crap out of me that people would end up in hell just because they had the unfortunate cultural background of being born into a particular culture. That just doesn't seem right to me. I think it may be even the next class. You're going to be asked to draw kind of a cartoon, a quick sketch of your relationship with God before TLI. And so this is the picture that I drew. It has a picture of me standing there. It has God on the other side of a wall. And I'm questioning, does God really exist? On my side of the wall are all the things in the physical world. There's science and math, which I had an affinity for. There's books that try to discuss God and have philosophy and ideas. There's the whole world and the universe, the stars in the sky. There's physical things like trees and nature, and there's jobs and industry. All those things are very concrete, very real. And I'm standing here on this side of the wall with all these concrete things, and I'm asked to believe, and I'm wondering in my own head whether there is a God on the other side of this wall that I can't see over. Okay, so this kind of is a big picture summary of my life. This will give you a little bit more insight into who I am. From age 0 to 20, I grew up in a really strict Christian denomination and pretty much was a really straight kid. Hardly ever sinned. You know, I was never drank, never smoked, never rebelled. But there was hidden sin there in the terms of my sexuality. And I felt extremely guilty about that. But for the most part, I was a very straight kid. Then from age 20 to 24, things kind of fell apart. I realized that I was kind of following all these rules, but I didn't really believe there was a God. And so I became very antagonistic to God and called myself an atheist. And it was at this time that my behavior went from very straight to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. From 24 to 31, I realized that, you know, just as though I couldn't prove there was a God, I couldn't prove there wasn't one, so I became agnostic. Still sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but I was in more of a questioning mode. 31 to 46, I came across Buddhism in Thailand, and I became a Buddhist. For 15 years, I was practicing Buddhism. And at that time, I also became very introspective, and I got married. And from 46 to today, I am a follower of Christ. And I still sin, but I openly admit it. So this brings me to the second key point that I wanted to make, which is what we believe drives our feelings, thoughts, and ultimately our behaviors. And hopefully these reality check examples that I've given you, both the videos and the examples from my own personal life, will give you some confidence that what I'm describing is true. Thanks for listening in to part 1, and we will continue in class with part 2.